James stepped off the interstellar transport, squinting against the intense violet light of Chlorophyllia's twin suns. The bustling spaceport thrummed with activity, yet as he confidently approached customs, he couldn't help but notice a sea of green faces turning to stare. Some gaped in shock, others curled their noses in disgust. "Well, this is a warmer welcome than I expected," James muttered, adjusting the collar of his tailored suit. At 40, he cut a striking figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that only accentuated his rugged charm. A green-skinned customs officer recoiled as he reached her booth. "Species?" she demanded, her tone thick with disdain. "Human," James replied smoothly, flashing a charming smile. "James Sterling, at your service." The officer's eyes widened. "Human? That's impossible. Your kind isn't permitted here." James frowned, reaching into his pocket for his datapad with travel documents. "There must be some mistake. I have all the necessary clearances." "Clearances?" The officer scoffed. "There's no such thing for your kind," she spat, her face twisted in distaste. "Security." Before James could protest, two burly chlorophyllian guards appeared, gripping his arms firmly but not roughly, leading him to a sterile holding area. His mind raced. The information broker had assured him that chlorophylla welcomed humans, that their females were eager for interspecies relationships. He'd spent his life savings on this journey, determined to find the alien bride of his dreams. Now it seemed he'd been spectacularly duped. Hours ticked by in the stark white room until the door finally hissed open. A statuesque chlorophyllian woman entered, her emerald skin highlighted by a crisp military uniform. Her golden eyes regarded James with a blend of curiosity and revulsion. "I am Security Chief Lilith," she announced. "Explain your presence on our world immediately." James stood, meeting her gaze steadily. "As I told your customs officer, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here on a perfectly legitimate—" "Legitimate?" Lilith sneered. "There is nothing legitimate about a human contaminating our planet with his filth." She gestured dismissively at James's entire person. "Now, hold on just a minute," James protested, patience thinning. "I traveled across half the galaxy to be here. I was told your people welcomed humans, that you were open to interspecies relationships." Lilith's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "Relationships? With humans?" She let out a harsh laugh. "Who filled your head with such ridiculous notions?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "An information broker on Center Prime. I paid good money for what he called reliable intel." "Then you were deceived," Lilith said bluntly. "Humans are considered barely above animals here. The very thought of intimate relations." She visibly shuddered. "Well, isn't this just lovely?" James muttered. Squaring his shoulders, he adopted a more businesslike tone. "Look, there's clearly been a major miscommunication. If you'll just allow me to book a ticket on the next transport off-world, I'll be out of your, leaves." Lilith's expression remained cold. "It's not that simple. You've illegally entered our sovereign territory. By law, you must be held in quarantine for a minimum of 30 days to ensure you carry no harmful pathogens." James groaned. 30 days? Surely we can work something out. I'm a businessman. Maybe we can negotiate." "This is not a negotiation, human," Lilith snapped. "You will be transferred to a secure medical facility for your quarantine. After that, your fate will be decided by our ruling council." Right on cue, the door opened again, and two chlorophyllian women in white coats entered, eyeing James with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "This is Dr. Marita, our chief xenobiologist," Lilith introduced the taller one, "and her assistant, Alida. They will oversee your quarantine and examination." Dr. Marita's eyes glinted with scientific curiosity as she circled James. "Fascinating," she murmured. "I've never had the opportunity to examine a live human specimen." "Specimen?" James bristled. "Now wait just a minute." But Marita was already reaching for a device that looked unsettlingly like a cattle prod. "This won't hurt much," she assured him with a smile that was anything but comforting. Alida, the younger assistant, hung back, her emerald cheeks darkening as she stared at James with a mix of wonder and shyness, unlike the other's disgust. "Is it true humans have red blood?" she blurted out, earning a sharp glance from Lilith. James chuckled. "Among other colors, yes, though I'd rather keep mine inside, if it's all the same to you ladies." Marita frowned. "It displays humor. How curious." "He," James corrected, "not it. And yes, humans are known for our wit, charm, intelligence, and devastating good looks." He winked at Alita, who blushed even more. Lilith made a disgusted noise. Enough of this. Take him to quarantine and ensure he's thoroughly decontaminated. As the guards moved to lead him out, James held up a hand. Before we go, I don't suppose I could get my luggage? A man likes to look his best, even in captivity. Lilith's gaze hardened. Your belongings will be thoroughly searched and sterilized. If deemed safe, some may be returned. James raised an eyebrow. I hope you ladies enjoy the Terran cologne. I brought my finest bottle. Alita brightened at this, which earned her another sharp look from Lilith as they led him out of the room. James's thoughts were racing. This was far from how he had imagined his galactic bachelor adventure would begin, but he had always been adaptable. These chlorophilia might see him as a dirty animal now, but he was determined to show them how charming a human could be. The secure medical facility turned out to be a sterile white cube, barely big enough for a bed and a small bathroom. James paced in the small space, trying to keep his optimism alive, though the grim reality of his situation weighed on him. Days blended together in a monotonous blur. Marita and Alita visited often, subjecting him to numerous tests and examinations. James endured it all with good humor, constantly asking questions about chlorophilia culture and shamelessly flirting whenever he had the chance. To his surprise, Alita became his most receptive audience. The young scientist's initial shyness gradually gave way to an eager curiosity about Earth and human customs. Is it true that humans keep other animals as companions? She asked during one of her visits, her eyes wide with fascination. James grinned. Pets? Dogs, cats, birds, lots of different animals. My neighbor back home even had a pot-bellied pig named Hamlet. Alita furrowed her brow. But isn't that unhygienic? No more so than people, really, James shrugged. Besides, the companionship is worth a little mess every now and then. Companionship? Alita repeated, her tone wistful. That sounds nice. James noticed the loneliness in her eyes. Don't you have friends here? He asked. Alita shook her head. I'm different. I'm too curious about other species. The others think it's inappropriate. Well, their loss is my gain, James winked. I'm happy to satisfy your curiosity anytime. Alita blushed deeply, but a shy smile appeared on her lips. Their conversation was cut short by Lilith's arrival. The security chief's usual scowl deepened when she saw how close Alita was to James. The council has agreed to hear the human's case, Lilith said brusquely. You'll have the chance to plead for leniency at tomorrow's reception. James straightened up, smoothing out his wrinkled shirt. Excellent. Do you think there's any chance I could get my suit back for the event? Lilith narrowed her eyes. This isn't a social occasion, human. It's your only chance to avoid permanent exile, or worse. I got the message, James nodded seriously. I'll behave myself. See that you do, Lilith growled. And Alita, you're needed in the lab now. As Alita hurried out, James caught her eye and gave her an encouraging smile. She shyly returned it before disappearing down the hallway. Left alone with Lilith, James decided to take a chance. So, Chief, off the record, what are my chances with the Council? Lilith's golden eyes locked onto him. Slim to none. Your presence here is an insult to our way of life. James stepped closer, speaking in a low, earnest voice. Is it really that bad? Look at me, Lilith. I'm not some mindless beast. I'm an intelligent being, just like you. Different, yes, but not lesser. For a brief moment, James saw something flicker in Lilith's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even curiosity, but it quickly vanished, replaced by her usual disdain. Save your pretty words for the council, human, she spat. They won't work on me. As she stormed out, James allowed himself a small smile. That brief flicker of interest, however fleeting, was progress. The next evening, James was escorted to a grand reception hall. The room was filled with the chatter of dozens of chlorophilia dignitaries, all of whom went silent when he entered. James stood tall, projecting confidence despite the hostile glares. A regal chlorophilia woman, with skin a deep forest green, approached. The jeweled circlet on her brow marked her as someone of high importance. So, she said, her voice smooth and melodic, this is the human who dares to trespass on our world. James bowed deeply. James Sterling, at your service. Your Highness. I am High Counselor Verdana, she responded coldly. And you, James Sterling, have caused quite a stir among my people. James flashed a charming smile and said, only good things, I hope. A wave of surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Verdon's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing again. "You're either very brave or very foolish, human," she remarked. "Maybe both. Tell me, why shouldn't we cast you out immediately?" James took a deep breath, fully aware that his next words could decide his fate. "High Counselor, respected members of the Council," he began. "I came to your world seeking connection, understanding between our species. Yes, I was misled about the nature of that connection," he admitted with a self-deprecating chuckle. "But during my brief time here, I have witnessed the beauty and wonder of chlorophylla culture. I've met people of great intellect and curiosity." His gaze landed on Alita in the crowd, and he smiled warmly before continuing. "All I ask for is the opportunity to learn more, to foster true understanding between our peoples. Surely, there is more that unites us than separates us, if we can look beyond superficial differences." The room grew quiet as the chlorophylla absorbed his words. James held his breath, fully aware of the gravity of the moment. Verdon opened her mouth to reply, but before she could speak, a commotion erupted near the buffet table. James turned to see a corpulent dignitary choking, his face turning a sickly shade of yellow-green. Without a second thought, James sprinted across the room. "He's choking!" James called out. "Let me help!" Before anyone could stop him, he reached the struggling chlorophylla and swiftly positioned himself behind the alien, performing the Heimlich maneuver. After a tense moment, a large chunk of food shot from the dignitary's mouth. The room filled with gasps of shock as the chlorophylla inhaled deeply. James gently steadied him. "Easy now, big fella. Take deep breaths." Lilith appeared at his side, her face a mixture of suspicion and reluctant respect. "What did you do to him?" she asked. "I saved his life," James answered calmly. "Standard first aid where I come from." The dignitary, still catching his breath, grasped James's hand. "Thank you," he croaked. High Counselor Verdon approached, her previous cool demeanor replaced by a cautious interest. "It seems we may have been hasty in our judgment of you, James Sterling. Perhaps there's more to humans than we thought." James bowed his head respectfully. "I'm happy I could assist, Your Excellency. I hope this shows that our species can indeed work together, perhaps even learn from each other." Verdon nodded slowly. "Indeed, we have much to discuss." She then turned to address the still surprised crowd. "The Council will reconsider the human status. For now, let us continue the reception with our unexpected guest of honor." As the tension in the room began to ease, James found himself surrounded by curious chlorophylla. He responded to their questions with ease and charm, all the while keenly aware of Lilith's observant gaze and Alita's beaming smile. It wasn't the romantic adventure he had imagined when he first came to chlorophylla, but as he sipped an oddly flavored drink and entertained his new acquaintances with tales of Earth, James couldn't help but feel that this could be the start of something even more fascinating. The days after the reception blurred into a whirlwind of activity. James found himself at the center of the Chlorophylla Society, a subject of both fascination and debate. The Council's decision to allow James to stay on the planet as a cultural exchange specimen had stirred the population deeply. Dr. Morita quickly set up a strict schedule of exams and interviews. James faced her probing questions and invasive tests with a good-natured attitude, taking every chance to learn more about his hosts. "Tell me, Doctor," James asked one afternoon as she analyzed a blood sample, "why are chlorophylla so opposed to interspecies contact? I can't be the first alien to visit your planet." Marita's golden eyes narrowed, her emerald skin glowing under the harsh laboratory lights. "Our isolation is about maintaining cultural purity, Mr. Sterling. We've seen how other species have been tainted by outside influences." James leaned back in his chair, a playful grin appearing. "So you don't think there could be any benefits to a bit of cultural exchange?" Marita's cheeks turned a deep forest green. "That's not a topic for discussion." "Oh, come on, Doctor," James insisted. "Surely a scientist like you isn't afraid of a little intellectual curiosity." Before Marita could answer, the lab door slid open. Lilith entered, her military uniform sharp and commanding. "That's enough for today, Doctor," she said. "The human has an appointment for new attire." Lilith grabbed James's arm with a firm but not painful grip. "This way, Mr. Sterling, and try to behave yourself." As they walked down the polished corridor of the research facility, James watched Lilith closely. Despite her stern demeanor, he couldn't help but notice the graceful curve of her neck and the strong set of her jaw. "You know, Chief," he said casually, "you don't need to keep up this tough act all the time. I promise I don't bite unless asked nicely." Lilith hesitated for a brief moment. "Your attempts at charm don't affect me, human. I'm here to protect my people, nothing more." "And you're doing a great job," James said reassuringly. "But have you ever thought that getting to know me might be the best way to protect your people? You know your enemy and all that." Lilith stopped suddenly and turned to face him, her golden eyes blazing with intensity that took James by surprise. "Is that what you are, Mr. Sterling?" "An enemy?" she asked. James met her gaze steadily. "I'd much rather be a friend, Lilith, to you and to all of Chlorophylia." For a long moment, they stood, locked in an unspoken challenge. Then, almost imperceptibly, Lilith's expression softened. "We'll see," she said quietly, before continuing their walk. The fitting room turned out to be a spacious area filled with shimmering fabrics and holographic displays. A team of Chlorophylia designers surrounded James, taking measurements and debating in rapid alien speech. "I hope you're not planning on dressing me like some sort of exotic pet," James joked as a light, flowing garment was draped over him. The lead designer, a slender female with intricate leaf-like patterns on her skin, clicked her tongue in disapproval. "We're creating a wardrobe that respects both your unique physiology and our aesthetic values." James caught sight of himself in a mirror and couldn't help but stifle a laugh. The outfit resembled a mix between a toga and a fern. "Well, when in Rome," he muttered. Over the next few weeks, James immersed himself in learning Chlorophylia customs with enthusiasm. He attended lectures on their history, tasted exotic dishes, some more palatable than others, and even tried to master their complex system of bioluminescent communication. His sincere efforts and quick wit gradually earned him the admiration of even the most skeptical Chlorophylia. James found himself invited to social events, academic symposia, and even a few clandestine clubs dedicated to human appreciation, popular among the younger generation. Throughout it all, Lilith remained a constant presence. The young scientist's initial shyness had evolved into a keen interest in all things human. James often noticed her sketching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her delicate green fingers moving quickly across her datapad. One evening, as they walked through a glowing bioluminescent garden, James casually remarked, "If you'd like to draw me, all you have to do is ask. I'd be more than happy to pose." Alita's face flushed a vivid shade of emerald. I'm not sure what you mean," she stammered. James chuckled and gently tucked a stray tendril of her leaf-like hair behind her ear. "Come on, Alita. You're a terrible liar, but from what I've seen, you're an excellent artist." Alita's eyes widened, a blend of embarrassment and pleasure flickering across her face. "You're not upset?" "Actually, I'm flattered," James replied, though he was curious why she found him so interesting to draw. Alita lowered her gaze. "You're different," she said softly. "Exciting. Unpredictable. Not like—" She waved vaguely at their surroundings. James felt a twinge of sympathy for the young Chlorophylia. "Sometimes being different can be a good thing," he said gently. "It keeps life interesting." Alita looked up at him, her golden eyes glowing in the soft garden light. For a moment, James thought she might say more, but she simply nodded and continued walking. As the days passed, James became increasingly aware of the effect his presence had on the females of Chlorophylia. Wherever he went, he attracted admiring glances and subtle flirtations. The alien quality that had once repelled them now seemed to be his most appealing trait. Even Lilith, despite her professional demeanor, wasn't immune. Their verbal sparring had started to take on a more flirtatious tone, with an unspoken tension between them. "You're late, Mr. Sterling," Lilith snapped one morning as James walked into her office for their scheduled security briefing. James leaned back in the chair across from her desk, his new Chlorophylia attire clinging to his muscular build. "Apologies, Chief. A group of admirers stopped me on my way here. Seems I've become quite the celebrity." Lilith's eyes narrowed sharply. "This isn't some game, human. Your presence is disrupting the natural order of our society." James leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Maybe your society could use a little disruption, Lilith. When was the last time you did something spontaneous? Something that made your heart race?" Lilith's breath hitched for a moment. James thought he may have gone too far, but then a slow, predatory smile crept across her face. Be careful what you wish for, Mr. Sterling. You might not be ready for what happens when a chlorophylla lets loose. James felt a thrill run down his spine. I look forward to finding out. The moment of tension was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Dr. Marita entered, her usual calm demeanor slightly flustered. Security Chief, we have a problem. The humans' pheromones appear to be affecting our population in unexpected ways. James raised an eyebrow. Pheromones. I assure you, Doctor, I haven't been doing anything intentional. Marita gave him a stern look. Intentional or not, Mr. Sterling, your mere presence is causing a hormonal disturbance among our females. We've received reports of normally reserved citizens behaving inappropriately. Lilith pinched the bridge of her nose, a sign James had come to recognize as a sign of deep frustration. What do you suggest we do, Doctor? We can't just lock him up again. Perhaps? Marita hesitated, her cheeks flushing. Perhaps if we were to neutralize the source of the pheromones. James stood up abruptly. Hold on a second. I'm all for science, but if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, the answer is a definite no. Lilith stood as well, stepping between James and Marita. Nobody is neutralizing anything, Doctor. We'll find another way. Just then, Alita burst into the office, her eyes wide with excitement. You have to come quickly. The council has called an emergency session. The council chamber was packed to the brim, with a sea of green faces turned toward the raised dais where High Counselor Verdana stood. James, flanked by Lilith and Marita, felt the weight of many eyes on them as they made their way to the front. Verdana's voice, amplified by some unseen technology, filled the room. Citizens of Chlorophylla. We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. The presence of a human among us has ignited a cultural revolution, one that threatens the very foundation of our society. A murmur rippled through the crowd. James tensed, bracing for the worst, but Verdon continued speaking. We cannot ignore the benefits his visit has brought. Scientific advancements, artistic inspiration, and a renewed zest for life itself, she said, her gaze settling on James. It is the decision of this council that the human James Sterling be permitted to remain on Chlorophylla indefinitely as our esteemed guest and cultural ambassador. The chamber erupted in a chaotic mix of cheers, protests, and excited chatter. James felt a rush of relief, followed quickly by a surge of determination. He had been given a chance, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. As the council session came to a close, James was swept up in a whirlwind of congratulations and veiled propositions. Chlorophylla females of all ages vied for his attention, their earlier disdain replaced by open admiration. Ladies, please, James chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. There's plenty of me to go around, though I must warn you, I'm not as easy as I look. A particularly bold Chlorophylla pressed herself against him, her leaf-like hair brushing his cheek. Perhaps you'd like a private tour of our bioluminescent caverns? She suggested in a low purr. Before James could respond, Lilith appeared at his side, her expression stern. That's enough, she said sharply, stepping between James and his admirers. The ambassador needs rest. Come along, Mr. Sterling. Lilith practically dragged him away from the chamber. James grinned. What's the matter, Chief? He teased. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were jealous. Lilith's grip on his arm tightened. Don't flatter yourself, human, she replied coldly. I'm just doing my job. Of course, James said with a knowing nod. And your job requires you to keep me all to yourself, doesn't it? Lilith spun around to face him, her golden eyes blazing with intensity. For a moment, James thought she might strike him. Instead, she grabbed the front of his tunic and pulled him close, her lips meeting his in a fierce, passionate kiss. James's world exploded in a rush of sensations. Her soft lips, the unfamiliar taste of her, the heat of her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing heavily. That, Lilith said breathlessly, was to silence you. James grinned, his heart racing. Feel free to silence me anytime, Chief. As they walked through the winding corridors of the council building, James couldn't shake the feeling that his adventure on Chlorophylla was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would take him. They reached a secluded section of the building, bathed in soft, bioluminescent light. The gentle glow highlighted the stunning beauty of Lilith, her high cheekbones, the delicate curve of her jaw, the elegance of her long neck. Her emerald green skin shimmered with an otherworldly radiance. Lilith paused and turned to face him fully. Her molten gold eyes held a mix of curiosity and desire. "You are an enigma, James Sterling," she whispered, her voice low and sultry, "and I find myself inexplicably drawn to you." James stepped closer, his hand reaching to trace the curve of her jaw. "The feeling is mutual, Lilith," he replied in a low voice, matching the intensity in her eyes. For a moment, they stood there, the air thick with anticipation. With a sense of anticipation, as if an unspoken agreement had been made, they moved towards each other. Their bodies collided in a tangle of desire and passion. Lilith's hands were everywhere, exploring the contours of his body with an urgency that matched his own. James was in awe of the smoothness of her skin and the way her muscles shifted beneath his touch. She was a vision of alien beauty, her form both familiar and strikingly exotic. He traced his hands down her back, feeling the tautness of her muscles and the delicate curve of her spine. Lilith arched toward him, a soft gasp escaping her lips. James couldn't help but smile at the sound, knowing that he was the one to provoke such a reaction from this formidable woman. Their lips met again. This time the kiss was slower, more deliberate. James savored the taste and feel of her, taking his time. Lilith responded with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pressed closer to him. As they kissed, James's hands wandered over her body, memorizing every curve and line. He traced the elegant slope of her shoulders, the soft curve of her breasts, and the dip of her waist. Lilith was the embodiment of sensual grace and strength, her body a reflection of her warrior spirit. He pulled back slightly, drinking in the sight of her. Lilith's chest rose and fell with each breath, her skin glowing under the soft light. Her golden eyes were half-lidded, filled with desire. James felt a surge of pride, knowing that he had sparked this intense fire within her. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. Lilith smiled slowly, seductively. "Flattery will get you everywhere, human." James chuckled softly, his hands resting on her hips. "Good to know." With a sudden motion, Lilith grabbed his hand and led him to a secluded alcove, a hidden nook bathed in light and shadows. There, she faced him, her eyes burning with intensity. "I've never done this before," she confessed in a low voice. "Not with a human." James's heart swelled with emotion at her vulnerability. "Neither have I," he replied softly, "but I'm sure we'll figure it out together." He gently caressed her cheek. Lilith leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the raw emotion in her gaze took his breath away. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what it's like." James's heart raced as he leaned in to kiss her tenderly. He poured all of his feelings into the kiss, hoping to convey everything words couldn't express. Lilith responded passionately, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. Slowly, reverently, James began to undress her, savoring the feel of her skin under his fingers, the way her breath quickened with each touch. Lilith watched him with dark, hooded eyes, her hands moving to strip away his clothing. When they were both completely bare, James paused to simply take in her beauty. Lilith was breathtaking, her body a perfect blend of strength and softness. Her curves were graceful and fluid, her lines sleek and elegant. Every inch of her was a testament to the beauty of her species, and James felt grateful that he was able to witness it. He reached out, gently skimming his hand over her shoulders, down her arms, and to her waist. Lilith shivered under his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. James leaned in, placing a soft kiss on her neck and then lower, on the hollow of her throat. Lilith's hands roamed over his back, tracing the lines of his muscles. She pulled him closer, arching her body into his. James groaned at the contact, his own desire rising to meet hers. Their movements became more urgent, their touches more insistent. James guided her down to the soft surface of the alcove, their bodies intertwining in a dance of passion and discovery. He marveled at how perfectly their bodies fit together, the way her soft gasps and moans filled the air. Lilith's skin was like velvet under his touch, her body eager and pliant. She moved with a grace that was both primal and exquisite, every motion reflecting the training of a warrior. James matched her every movement. His body moved in perfect rhythm, responding to her every cue as they synchronized their movements, their breaths blending together, their hearts beating as one. James felt an overwhelming connection with her, an intimate bond that felt like their souls were intertwining, offering each other comfort and fulfillment. He had never experienced anything like this before, and he knew he never would again. Their climax was a shared symphony of sensation and emotion, a crescendo of ecstasy that left them both shaking and breathless. Holding Lilith close, their bodies still intertwined, they rode out the waves of their release together. When the tremors eventually subsided, they lay together in the afterglow, their breathing slowing down. James gently brushed a strand of hair from Lilith's face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "That was incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Lilith's eyes fluttered open, soft and content. "Yes, it was," she replied, a lazy smile tugging at her lips. "You, James Sterling, are full of surprises." James chuckled, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "And you, Lilith, are more than I could have ever imagined." They remained there for a while, savoring the intimacy and the new, deep connection between them. The world beyond their secluded alcove seemed distant and insignificant, as if they had created their own private sanctuary. Eventually, Lilith stirred, her fingers tracing delicate patterns on his chest. "We should probably head back," she said quietly. "The council will be wondering where we've gone." James sighed, reluctantly pulling away. "You're right. Duty calls." They dressed in silence, the air still charged with the lingering effects of their time together. When they were ready, Lilith took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. In the weeks that followed James's appointment as cultural ambassador, his life became a whirlwind of activity. His days were filled with diplomatic meetings, cultural exchanges, and an ever-expanding list of social obligations. The Chlorophylla Society, once so rigid and structured, seemed to be changing before his eyes. But as his popularity grew, so did the complexities of his personal life. He found himself at the heart of a tangled web of romantic entanglements, with Lilith, Marita, and Alita, each competing for his attention in their own way. True to form, Lilith fluctuated between intense passion and cool professionalism. One moment, she'd be pressing him against a wall in a secluded hallway, and the next, she'd treat him with frosty formality in public. "You're sending some mixed signals here, Chief," James remarked after one such encounter. Lilith's golden eyes flashed with warning. Whatever this is between us, it cannot interfere with my duties or yours." James took a step closer, his voice lowering. "And what if I wanted to interfere?" Before Lilith could reply, they were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Marita. The normally composed scientist seemed somewhat flustered as she addressed James. "Ambassador, I need your assistance with an urgent matter in the lab." James raised an eyebrow. "Of course, Doctor. Lead the way." As they walked toward the lab, James couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in Marita's demeanor. Her usual clinical detachment had been replaced with a nervous energy. Once inside the privacy of her lab, Marita turned to face him, her cheeks flushed a deep shade of emerald. "Mr. Sterling, James, I find myself experiencing some rather unscientific." James stifled a smile. "Oh, really, Doctor? And what kind of thoughts are we talking about?" Marita nervously fiddled with her datapad. "I've been analyzing our genetic compatibility. The possibility of interspecies offspring is fascinating, don't you think?" Caught off guard, James blinked. "That's definitely an interesting topic to explore, though perhaps we should start with dinner before we dive into discussions about children." Marita's eyes widened in realization. "Oh yes, of course, how thoughtless of me. Dinner would be perfectly fine." As James left the lab, his mind still reeling from the conversation, he nearly bumped into Alita. The young Chlorophylla held a large canvas close to her chest, her face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "James, I've been searching for you. I have something to show you." Intrigued, James followed Alita to a quiet garden alcove. With shaking hands, she revealed her canvas. James's breath caught in his throat. It was a remarkably lifelike portrait of him, painted in vivid colors that seemed to capture not just his appearance, but the very essence of his being. "Alita," he whispered, "this is incredible." The young artist's face lit up, her leaf-like hair fluttering with excitement. "Do you really think so? I've been working on it for weeks. I wanted to capture, well, everything about you." James examined the painting, deeply moved by the emotion expressed in every brushstroke. "You've done an amazing job. I'm truly honored." Alita stepped closer, her golden eyes shining. James, I think I'm in love with you. Her confession hung in the air, fragile and full of possibility. James felt a rush of affection for Alita, tinged with a sense of regret. He opened his mouth to reply. But before he could speak, an ear-splitting alarm shattered the moment. Red emergency lights bathed the garden in an eerie glow. James's communicator buzzed to life with Lilith's urgent voice. Ambassador Sterling, report to the command center immediately. We're under attack. James's instincts kicked in, pushing aside all thoughts of romance. I have to go, he told Alita. Find somewhere safe and stay there. The command center was a flurry of activity. Lilith stood at the center, barking orders while holographic displays showed a fleet of ominous ships approaching. Chlorophylla status report, James demanded as he entered. Lilith turned, relief flashing in her eyes despite the tension. It's the Zarian, she said. They've finally made their move. James swore under his breath. He had heard rumors about the Zarian, a warlike race that had long coveted the resources of Chlorophylla. What's the status of our defenses? Marita, who had just arrived, shook her head grimly. Our shields are holding, but we've never faced an attack like this. Our weapons are mostly defensive. James's mind raced, quickly assessing the situation. What about that experimental photosynthetic cannon you've been working on, Doctor? Marita's eyes widened. It's not ready. We haven't even begun proper testing. It might be our only chance, James insisted. He turned to Lilith. Can you delay them long enough for us to get it online? Lilith nodded firmly. We'll throw everything we've got at them, but we need to act fast. As Lilith coordinated the defense, James and Marita rushed to the research facility. They worked quickly to get the massive cannon operational, their earlier awkwardness forgotten as they focused on the emergency at hand. It's not stabilizing, Marita cried as the weapon's core fluctuated wildly. James gritted his teeth, making rapid adjustments. We need more power. What about tapping into the planet's natural energy grid? Marita gasped. That's never been done before. The risks are smaller than the risk of doing nothing, James interrupted. Trust me, Doctor. Their eyes met, and after a pause, Marita nodded. Okay, let's do it. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic work. James's communicator crackled with updates from the battle above. The Chilion defenses were faltering. Finally, with a surge of power that made the whole facility tremble, the cannon powered up. James aimed it at the lead Zarian ship, his hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. Here goes nothing, he muttered, then fired. A blinding green beam shot into the sky, cutting through the Zarian fleet like a hot knife through butter. Ship after ship exploded in silent bursts of light. The command center erupted in cheers as the remaining Zarian ships turned and fled. James slumped against the cannon's control panel, exhausted but elated. Marita wrapped her arms around him in a rare display of emotion. We did it! You did it! James laughed, hugging her back. We all did it, Doctor. This was a team effort. As the adrenaline from the battle wore off, James found himself face to face with Lilith. Her usually stern expression softened, her eyes filled with pride and something deeper. You saved us all, she said quietly. James gently cupped her face in his hands. We saved each other, Lilith. Before he could say anything else, Lilith pulled him into a passionate kiss. This time, there was no holding back. It was a kiss of relief, of passion, and of newfound understanding. When they finally pulled apart, James knew with complete certainty that everything had changed, not just between him and Lilith, but for all of Chlorophylla. In the days that followed, as the planet celebrated its victory and mourned its losses, James found himself at the heart of a societal transformation. The Chlorophyllians, once deeply isolationist, were beginning to recognize the importance of interspecies cooperation. It was during a grand ceremony celebrating the heroes of the Zarian attack that James made a life-changing decision. As High Counselor Verdana presented him with Chlorophylla's highest honor, he seized the moment to address the gathered crowd. Friends, allies, and fellow defenders of Chlorophylla, he began, his voice resonating through the quiet audience. This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us, humans and Chlorophyllians alike. It stands as proof of what we can accomplish when we unite, when we open our hearts and minds to new possibilities. He turned and sought out Lilith in the crowd. Their eyes met, and James felt a sudden, overwhelming certainty. I came to your world seeking a bride, that much is true, but what I found was so much more. I found a home, a purpose, and a love I never anticipated. A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience as James stepped down from the stage and walked toward Lilith. Chief Lilith, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, you are the most frustrating, captivating, and incredible woman I have ever met in this galaxy or any other. Will you marry me? For a brief moment, it seemed as though the entire planet held its breath. Then Lilith, her usual composed demeanor breaking, flashed a brilliant smile. Yes, you impossible human, yes. The crowd erupted in joyous cheers as James lifted Lilith into his arms. From the corner of his eye, he saw Marita and Alita. Both women looked wistful, but there was no bitterness in their smiles as they applauded along with everyone else. The wedding that followed was an extraordinary event, unlike anything Chlorophylla had ever witnessed. It combined the best of Earth and Chlorophyllian traditions, symbolizing the new era of cooperation between their peoples. As James and Lilith exchanged vows beneath an arch of bioluminescent flowers, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. What had started as a misguided quest for an alien bride had turned into so much more. In the years that followed, James embraced his role as Earth's ambassador to Chlorophylla with the same charm and resolve that had won the hearts of its people. Together, he and Lilith worked tirelessly to strengthen the bonds between their species, breaking down old prejudices and forging new alliances. Marita's groundbreaking research into interspecies genetics led to the creation of a new generation of hybrid children. Alita's artwork, which celebrated the beauty of diversity in all its forms, became famous throughout the galaxy. And as for James, he never lost his reputation as the most desirable man in the galaxy, a fact that amused Lilith endlessly. Their love, forged in the heat of conflict and nurtured through years of shared experience, only deepened with time. James stood on the balcony of their home, gazing at the twin suns setting over the shimmering forests of Chlorophylla. As he watched, he reflected on the twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. He had originally come in search of a green-skinned bride, but instead found a new world, a new purpose, and a love beyond his wildest imagination. With a contented smile, he turned back toward Lilith, who was waiting for him, her golden eyes glowing with affection. Whatever challenges the future might bring, James was certain they would face them together. One human, one Chlorophyllian, united in love and ready for their next grand adventure. Dear listeners, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You've just experienced an interstellar romance, thrilling battles, and a societal revolution. Not bad for a day's journey, right? If you enjoyed this tale of love, heroism, and occasional alien mischief, show it some love of your own. Hit that like button, share it with your friends, and leave a comment telling us your favorite part. Was it the fierce battles, the tender moments, or maybe James's undeniable charm? Thank you for being part of this cosmic adventure. Until our next journey, keep looking up at the stars. You never know what wonders lie ahead.